Now to make our interior box, we'll take the 4 pieces and cut some joining strips, and we'll first put this together flat. This is just a butt joint construction, so I'll line up my joining strip right along the edge, remove the backing paper, line up the bottom and the top edge so it exactly meet, and then I'll put that strip down and give it a good burnish. And I'll add another joining strip on the end, but I will not make it 3-dimensional yet. So now that we have the 4 sides of the interior box joined, we're going to turn it over. So we're looking at the outside now. And on this edge that's facing us on the 2 long sides, we're going to add some ledger strips. And I'm just going to cut each one to be just slightly shorter than the box side. Now when we install these, we'll want to keep them a 1/16 of an inch away from this edge. I've again colored mine black so that you could see this more easily. Just hold that back a 1/16 of an inch from that edge and put both of the pieces on. So now that I have both pieces installed, I gave them a good burnish, and we can flip this back to the other side. Remove the score tape backing from here and just fold this over together and make that last butt joint and go ahead and burnish that from the inside. This is the interior box base, and I'm going to prep it with some of our joining strips. I'll just remove, I've cut these to length, I'll remove the backing and install them right up to the edge on all 4 sides. So I've got my joining strips all attached here, and we are ready to put this into the box. The side with the ledger strips is the top, so I'm going to just turn it over so that the bottom is facing up, and I can put this in. Now it should be flush with this bottom edge. You can drop it in from the top, but I find it easier to do it this way. And just make sure that it's flush there all the way around. Then you can put it this way and push down and make sure it's flush, and then attach all of the joining strips on the inside of the box and give them a good burnish. Now the reason we put those joining strips on the inside is so that we wouldn't add any extra dimension to the outside of this box. Even though you may think it's insignificant, sometimes those little thicknesses of cardstock will add up. So there's our interior box, and we're ready to attach that to the base. Next we'll do a dry fit of the interior box into the watering can. And it will be a snug fit. Just kind of give the watering can a little squeeze and it will fit right down in there. And when you first put it in here, you can see mine sitting a little cattywampus there. You want to make sure that it goes in all the way straight and flush and sits on that bottom. And you'll feel when you've got it sitting flush on the bottom, 'cause when you put your hand in there, you'll hit the bottom. And then also on these sides here, the top of this box should be about a 1/16 of an inch above the edge of the trim that's coming in here. That will make it so that the top of the ledger strip that's on the box is at the same height as the ledger strip that's on the watering can. Once you see that you've got a good idea of where it's going to go in, you can take the interior box out and put some blobs of glue on the bottom of it and put it back down, and again check to make sure you've got that good fit at the bottom. It should be nice and straight coming this way, not, you know, shifted at all. You can use your ruler to check that and go ahead and put some pressure on that. Now, to fill in these spaces on these two sides, on the cutting guide under medium weight chipboard, under the lid section, there are two pieces labeled interior box top. They're 1/2 inch wide by 5.5 inches long, and we're going to make a tick mark at 1/2 inch in on each end. Connect that tick mark to the corner and cut off those triangles, and repeat that on the other piece. Then you can do a little dry fit, and the pieces should fit in there nicely and rest on those two ledger strips. And if you need to make any little adjustments, you can, but this should be a good fit there like I show you here. And then I'll just pull them out with the tip of my craft knife and put some glue on those ledger strips. Once I have the glue on the ledger strips there, I've done it on one side at a time, I'll just go ahead and place the pieces of chipboard in place and make sure they're seated in there firmly. Do one at a time so you can put some pressure on this like this. I'm just kind of pinching it so I've got a good nice fit there until that glue has a chance to grab. Now I just happen to have a couple of these bulldog clips. They're 3 inches long and they're just perfect to put some pressure on there. But if you don't have those, just use your hands and it will set up pretty quickly. So we'll start our lid construction with the lid main base. It's a piece of medium weight chipboard, and we need to cut off the corners so that it can fit inside of here. And I want to cut off the corners by measuring 9/16 on each side of the corner, and I'll just use the ruler on my craft mat. 9/16 is a 1/16 of an inch greater than a half. So if I bring this down, I find the 1/2 and then the 5/8 inch mark. If I make a tick mark right in between those two, that will be 9/16 there. And I'll repeat that all around. Now I find it easiest to make these small cuts like this just by using my scissors and lining up the scissor point with each of those tick marks and cutting that off. And then you can put your lid in here and see how the fit goes. It should have a little wiggle room in here. You can see mine does. And if yours doesn't have just a teeny bit of wiggle room, or if it's too snug, you want it to be able to come in and come out very easily. Next, I'll take a piece of cardstock. This is just a small scrap, and I'm going to trace the end. We just want to see what those angles of those corners were. When we do our pattern paper, we don't need to have a piece that goes the entire length. So I just mostly am concerned about getting the angles of those corners drawn. And then I'll just put lid on here and set that aside for now. Then I'll take my marker and go around the edges of my base here, and then I'll prep it with score tape and add a piece of cardstock that just comes right to the edges. It does not need to come over the edges. So here is my lid base with the cardstock added, and the edges have been inked. Besides putting score tape around the edges, I did put some regular adhesive strips just in the middle to have good coverage. And now we can just set that aside. The lid top is a piece of lightweight chipboard, and it's bending along its length. And we're going to make a tick mark on the top, on the left side and the right side, and we'll make it 1 7/8, 1 7/8 in from the side, and do that on both sides. I'm just using my craft mat dots to help me make that. And then I will connect the tick mark with the corner and cut that off to make a trapezoid. And then we'll find a piece of scrap cardstock or something to trace around this to make a template for our pattern paper. Next we'll work on the piece of medium weight chipboard labeled Lid End Large, and I'm going to start by putting it on my craft mat with the long edge vertical, and then I'm going to draw a line that is 1.5 inches away from that top edge. And then I'll find the center point of that line and mark it. Next, I've set my compass to a radius of 1.5 inches. I have a good sharp point on there. I'll put the point of the compass in on that mark that we just drew, and I'll scribe an arc in the top section. Next, I want to connect the bottom corners up to this arc. We're not coming to this point here. We want to have kind of a smooth transition from the arc down to that corner. So I'll put my ruler down at the corner and I'll just move it till I can just see the edge of that circle there, and then I'll make that connection. Oh, it's probably about 3/8 of an inch above that line there. And I'll do the same thing on that other side. And now I'll cut out that shape. Now that I have the shape cut out, I'll take a piece of scrap cardstock or something and make a template of this piece that we can use for decorative paper. And then I'll add score tape to this piece. It doesn't have to be as wide as I have here, it just made it easier to cut these curves. Next, I have a piece of cardstock that is 3 7/8 inch wide by 4.5 inch tall. I'm going to put it on my scoreboard and score the long edge at 1/2 inch, so I have the shorter edge coming across the top. So 1/2 inch and make a score. Then I fold it on that crease and I'll put it down so that the folded side is facing down towards my craft mat. And I'll take my little shape here, my Lid End Large, and I'm going to attach it to the cardstock, lining up the bottom edge of the shape with that score line that we made here and centering it left to right. Give that a burnish and then make a line that comes 1/2 inch away from your shape on the cardstock and cut it out. Next, we'll prep these areas with some score tape. Now let's take our lid top and just kind of train it to want to make a curve. Just kind of use your fingers along it so it wants to bend in nicely and make a curve. So once you've trained this, let's see where this is going to go. This edge here is going to fit around the large lid end so that the lid end fits inside of there. And you can see I've got some little pieces of blue tape here to the side. I'm going to hold one end down and put some blue tape on here just to hold it in place. And then I'll put these other two pieces, and that'll just help hold the lid in place. And it's more important that these corners match down here than having it tight against the top up there. It may not be exactly perfect, but you can just get these corners to match and then kind of get the rest in the middle here. And then I've kind of come back in here and filled in with a couple more pieces of tape just so this piece is securely on here so that I don't have to worry about that while I'm fastening down the cardstock. Next, we'll just hold on to the lid and just kind of start training this cardstock to fit around that curve. We're just making a little crease right there to begin with. Next, we'll make a little release cut along that score line right up to the edge of the chipboard on either side. Just a little snip right along there on either side. Because we're going to start by wrapping around the part that goes on the main body of the lid top here. So, just like when we've done other curved pieces, I like to take my score tape backing off first so I don't have to deal with a lot of little pieces of backing to remove. And then I'll take my scissors and I'll line them in. These are non-stick scissors. And I'll come about on the straight part here, this part that's straight, you can leave that until it starts to curve. So you can make your first snip where it wants to start curving. And then after that, and we'll do that on both sides, just make it right up to there to where it wants to start curving. And then come about every 3/16 of an inch or so along the rest here. And when you make your snips, point to and you can make a dot right here in the center. So you can aim the point of your scissor towards that dot, and that'll give you something that's always kind of oriented the correct way going around. So I'll go ahead and make my snips. Next, we'll work on the piece of medium weight chipboard labeled lid and small, and we'll start by marking a center point, and it's going to be 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom edge and then centered left and right. Once you have that center point, get your compass with a sharp point and set the radius to 2 inches. The radius is 2 inches. Then we'll put our point in at that location we drew and make an arc. Once you've made that arc, turn the piece on its side and measure 7/8 of an inch down from that top point, or this edge right here, 7/8 of an inch down, and cut that piece off. Then take this shape and hold it up to the opposite end of your lid top and fit it in there and test and see if it will fit how the ends meet. Now my ends are just a hair off, so I'm going to cut this piece, a sliver off of this piece, so that I can have a nice fit there. Yours may be right on, and I'm sure it won't be too small. So now I cut about a 1/16 of an inch off, and now I have a good fit here. And a minute ago I said I was sure it wouldn't be too small, but if it is, don't worry about it. You can just match up the important thing is to match up the corners. So we need to do a little more prep work on this piece before we're ready to attach. First, we'll draw a little pattern of this to use as a template for our pattern paper. Once I have my pattern made, I'm going to cover the one side of this with score tape. Then I'll cut a piece of cardstock that is 1 1/4 inch tall by 4 1/4 long. It's also listed in the cardstock cutting guide. And I'll take my little piece of chipboard and remove the score tape backing. This time I'm going to line it up right with the bottom edge and center it left to right. And just like we did for the large end, we'll cut this out so there's about a 1/2 inch remaining there and put score tape on that piece. Now that we have this piece prepped, it's going to go in here, and we'll again use some pieces of blue tape to secure it in there and then attach it just like we did the other end. So here I have all my little pieces of blue tape holding it in place. I've trained my edge here to go around, and then I've made my little snips so I'm ready to attach it. And then of course, once I get all my little pieces stuck down, I'll give everything a super good burnish and then nip off these little corners on the sides. Next on the cardstock cutting guide, there's a piece labeled lid filler. It's 2 by 7, and that piece is just meant to go and fill in between these two areas. It'll just give a smoother look to the pattern paper when it goes on. Now it should fit from corner to corner, here to here, or very close. If it's a little short, don't worry about it. And then just mark and cut off the ends once you're holding it on there pretty firmly. Just mark and cut off those ends. And then if you have any little places where it wants to overlap, just kind of nip out around there so you get a nice smooth piece to fit in there. We don't want to have that bumping up there. And then once you've got a piece that fits in there well, go ahead and put some score tape on the back. On the long edges, you can just use 1/4 inch, that'll be fine. Down here, you want to use at least 1/2 inch, or put a couple rows of 1/4 inch, because that's where the join is going to be made to the base of the lid. And then remove the backing from one end and secure it in place. And then you can remove the backings from the other pieces and get that wrapped around. You can put a little regular adhesive in the middle here if you want to. And then if you have any overhang, go ahead and trim that off. And then make sure you burnish this piece well in place. Next, on this long tab that's here, we're going to just cut this in at a 45-degree angle. I'm using one of the lines on my craft mat just to help me make that 45-degree angle there. And I'm just coming from the corner, and I'll repeat that on the other side here. Next, we'll add decorative paper to this end, the large end and the small end, and I've got my templates out here that I used. I'll just check them for size, and because they were cut to the entire size, and I like to have a little bit of a reveal, so I'll just see how much reveal I want and make some trimming on my templates until I have them the right size. So I found that for my small end, I could just trim 1/8 of an inch off the bottom to get a nice little reveal. And then for my large end, I think you can see that I've drawn a line around the shape, and I like to have about a 1/16 of an inch reveal. So that's what I've drawn here, and now I'll just recut that shape. Next, I'll cut my shapes out of decorative paper. I'm using this blue paper. It's actually the reverse side of the feature paper for this paper collection, but I'm going to show the blue side for my pieces. So I'll get those cut out, and before I cut my shapes out, I've backed it with score tape so that I can cut the shape and cut the score tape backing at the same time. Then I've added some ink around the edges, and then I'll just go ahead and install each piece and make sure I give it a good burnish. Next, on the front side, I'm going to use this little chipboard piece. I've put a little bit of blue ink on the bottom edge and inked it with my vintage photo a little on the top. Now this is a 2-inch circle, and if you don't have the chipboard pieces, you can cut a 2-inch circle from lightweight chipboard and just find something in the paper line that you like and make your own little circle. And I'll just use a little wet glue, and I'll get that centered on this end down here. And I'll let that glue set up for a few minutes. So next I'm going to work on my lid template a little bit, and I want to again have that 1/16 of an inch reveal. So I'm just pulling it back about a 1/16 of an inch from the edge here and seeing if that'll work. If not, you can just trim a 1/16 of an inch or whatever reveal you like to have from each of these edges. So once I have my template trimmed off, I've cut a little piece of pattern paper that is 1 inch by 3 3/8, 1 by 3 3/8, and I'll take this piece and line up the end of my template, and I'll cut off these corners, and if I have a little extra over here, I'll cut that off as well. Then I'll back this piece with some score tape, ink the edges, and install it on one end of my lid here, leaving that nice little reveal. And give that a good burnish. Now this side won't show, only this end down here in front of the points is going to show. Next we'll add some tabs to join this lid top to the lid base, and on the cardstock cutting guide there's a strip listed that is 1 inch wide by 8 inches long. There's no scoring, it's just a flat piece of cardstock, and we'll be using that for this step. So the first thing we'll do is pick one side and measure from corner to corner. And mine is 3 9/16, which is a 1/16 of an inch greater than 3 1/2. So I'll cut a piece that is that length out of this strip of cardstock. Once I have that cut, I'm going to turn it on its side and draw a line down the center. And then using that line as a guide, I'm going to attach it with some pieces of blue tape to the edge of my side there. And this is just going to help us mark some miters that we want to cut. So on this corner by the small end, I'm going to come in to the edge of that cardstock there. So there's of this piece right here. So I'm going to cut from the center up to there. This is erasable pen, so I could do this, and then I'll cut that corner off. And then down here, from the center, I'm not going to come quite that far on this one because it's much steeper. I'm going to come about halfway in here, or about a 1/4 inch from this edge, and I'll join that to that halfway point, and I'll cut off that corner. So remove your blue tape here, make those cuts. Now I've made those cuts, and I put a strip of score tape. I used 3/8 inch. You could use 1/2 inch here if that's what you have. If you only have 1/4, put a couple on each side. And I'll use that line as a placement guide on the inside here. And then I'll go ahead and attach just this one side that we made the miters on to the lid top. And make sure you give that a really good burnish. So now you've got a tab on one side here, and we'll repeat that same procedure. Measure the length and make the miters for the other side just like we did the first side. So now we have a nice joining tab on each side of our lid top. Next we'll join our lid top to our lid base, and the placement is that this short end goes towards the end that we put paper on, and the corners here line up with these two corners on the base. So it comes in like this, and then we're going to wrap these tabs to attach it. So I'm just holding it in place. I'm going to work on one side at a time, and I'll just run my thumb along here to kind of make a crease so I know where this is going to get creased, and then I'll hold that in position, flip around to this side, and make a similar crease over here. Once I have those creases made, I'm going to remove the base. I'm just going to fold these tight down, and if you can get your bone folder in there, you can burnish that as well. Now, in addition to this score tape that I've got here, I'm just going to use some diamond glaze, or you could use glossy accents. I'm just going to put a series of little dabs coming down here, and that's just insurance to make sure that this piece is not going to go anywhere. And then I'm checking my alignment up here. It looks good, and I'll just wrap this side around. And then I'll repeat that same process over here for this side. Now you can see that sometimes there's a little bow there. Just make sure it comes in nice and tight before you wrap this around. And then we'll give those two strips a good burnish. And when I did my burnishing, I came from this side as well, so I'll get a nice sharp line there. And then you can fold this tab up here and remove that score tape backing and attach this tab. Next, I want to measure to see how big of a piece of decorative paper I need for this spot. So I'm measuring up to the crease, and I have 1 1/4 inches. So because I like to have a 1/16 of an inch reveal on each side, I'll cut a strip that is 1 1/8 for me to have that 1/16 of an inch reveal would be 3 1/4. So of my pattern paper. So just measure for the kind of reveal that you want and cut your pattern paper to that size. Then use your lid template to mark and cut off the corners. Once you have your corners trimmed off, go ahead and ink, put score tape on the back, and install it with your reveal in this location. And then finally we want to cut a piece of decorative paper to go for this top. So I have my template piece here, and I'll just try it on here for size. I know I want to have about a 1/16 of an inch reveal up there at the top. And so I can see how much I need to cut it off here. This grows a little bit, you know, when we add the cardstock on everything. So I think I'll first try just trimming off a 1/16 from this back end here and see how that fits. So that's pretty good, this distance now. So now I'm going to look at these edges. I want to have a 1/16, and I'm holding it pretty tightly around here. I can see my angle is off just a little smidge, so I have a 1/16 of an inch showing there. So if I come down here and mark it so that I'll have a 1/16 of an inch showing there, I'll trim off that little wedge on this edge. So now I have a piece that's good on this side, and I'm wrapping it tightly around to the other side so I can see what's going on. And for me, I'm a little bit short, so I'm going to see how much I want to add on here. I'm going to add a piece that, I'll probably just add a piece that's 1/4 of an inch just onto here, and then I can trim it if I need to. So yours may be different, you know, it kind of depends on how much reveal you want and how tightly everything went together. So I'm going to add a piece of cardstock onto this template here. So I just took a 1/4-inch strip of cardstock and some Scotch tape and extended that, and now I'll see how that fits. And actually I think that fits pretty well all the way around. So I'll take my template and go cut my piece of pattern paper. So here's my pattern paper, and I'm just doing another little test fit around here, wrapping it pretty tightly and looking at it. And I think I can even trim off a little bit on this edge, maybe just a little wedge. The paper I used for my template was a little thicker than this pattern paper, and so there's a little fine-tuning that needed to be made. So I'll make that fine-tuning, and I'll go ahead and ink this up. Now to prep this with score tape, when I put this on, I've decided I'm going to start with this edge over here. So I've put a long piece going edge to edge of score tape along that edge. And then I've just filled in with the rest. And then to do this, I'll just remove that long piece, and only that long piece to begin with, and put it in place here lightly with that reveal that I've chosen. I'm just kind of holding it with my thumb right there, and then wrapping it around to see that I have it in the proper position. And once I see that I have it in the proper position, I'll fasten that piece of score tape down. And then I can just remove the other pieces and wrap around. And then of course you'll give everything a good burnish. And then the lid can just fit in here like this, so you can remove it when you want to get at what you've got inside. Now maybe you can see that sometimes there's a little raw chipboard showing here, and in order to take care of that, if that bothers you, I'm just going to stick a piece of cardstock in there to protect my side wall there, and just take, this is Mermaid Lagoon, which matches my paper, and then I can just color that that chipboard there at the end. And then you can do the same thing along the edge here, or you could even cut a piece of cardstock to go over that edge. And then to finish off the trim at the top, I'm going to use 2 strips that I've cut from the green that I've cut from this striped paper. It's on the back of this paper, and I'll take one and I will cut it to length. I'm going to start it just at the front here of the bridge, wrap it around, and come a little bit past the center over here. So I'll go ahead and get that piece installed. And once I have this piece installed, I'll cut the other one to length. I want to have just a little bit of an overlap on both ends here. And I'll go ahead and put that piece on. And of course you'll want to give that a good burnish. So there's the trim all installed. After I put this green trim on, I thought there was just a little bit too much of an expanse of blue here, so I decided to add another piece of trim up here to the top. And you can do this if you want to, or you can add something else if you don't like the trim that I've selected. So this is a piece from the same paper that I cut the green trim that goes around the top of the watering can. And I just cut it with the orange stripe and then even with the purple here on this edge. I'm going to take my top, and I put a little temporary adhesive on the back here, and I'm going to line these 2 corners up right here. And I'll zoom in for this. So I've lined the corner up here with the pattern paper. I'm going to make a little tick mark over here with for the pattern paper, and then I'll cut that angle off. And I've checked to see that it's going around and it's going right along that edge there. Now I've got it cut off, and I'll put it back on here in place. Again with temporary adhesive. And then I'll just take a little temporary adhesive over on this side and wrap this tightly around. So I have that wrapped tightly around, and now this time on this end I need to make 2 tick marks, one for the back and one for up here at the front. And I'll connect those and cut that piece off. And now I'll do some inking and add some score tape. So when I attach this, I'm going to start over here on this side, so I've removed that piece of score tape backing. I still have my temporary adhesive on this side, so I'm just going to stick it down on this side. I don't have my score tape on yet, but I have it on there, so it's nice on this side, and then I can wrap it around, attach this side with the score tape, and now I can pull up my temporary adhesive, remove the remainder of my backing, and be assured that I'm going to get a nice placement for my piece of trim. And of course I'll give that a good burnish. And I think that piece of trim, it breaks up this blue and just adds a nice little detail up there at the top.